We're live.
Okay. Okay, we're just about to get started, so hopefully we'll see a couple people join. All right, people are starting to join now. So we're going to start in just a minute. I'm sorry that we're a minute or two late, but we're going to give a chance for people to get to join us, and we're just showing a puppy for your enjoyment while we allow a few people to join. Okay, so we have quite a few people joining. So this is going to be a video talking about evaluating Newfoundland puppies, and a lot of what we're going to talk about could be applied to evaluating any breed of puppy, but we're going to specifically talk about Newfoundland puppies. And so I'm going to start by describing why exactly are we doing this, because it would be very easy to just pick the cutest puppy that, you know, is fun and jumps into your lap and keep that puppy for your breeding program, and then let all of your puppy buyers come and, you know, pick whichever puppy appeals to them. But we have to consider how important it is that these puppies, as we grow them out, we're going to make a big investment in them. And as we're going to try showing them, we're going to try considering them to be in our breeding program, we want to start with only the very best animals that we can. And so trying to evaluate these puppies and compare them to our description of the Newfoundland standard is going to be super important in deciding which puppy we want to keep. It's important for someone who wants to show a dog. It could be important for someone who wants to do working activities with their dog, because there are distinct personality traits that may be, you know, very important to consider when you want to do working activities with your dog. But most importantly, we are trying to evaluate these puppies to see how well we feel they conform to the Newfoundland standard, so we can try to pick the puppy that will be the best chance to improve our breeding program and improve the Newfoundland breed as we go forward with this animal. So the first thing I'm going to show you before we jump into the puppies is I'm going to bring in my diagram. And yeah, Steve will hold it a little better back. So this diagram, I used a teaser of the picture that is on the left. And this picture on the left, hopefully people got a glance at it, has a nice little diagram. And you can find a really similar diagram in the illustrated guide, where it shows you some of the things we're going to be looking at on the puppy, like the withers, the sternum, where's the elbow, where's the point of hock and the point of croup. And we're going to use those to use the information in the standard to apply it to the puppies. And ideally, I suppose it would have been great to do this video at the very end of a series where we talked about fronts and we talked about rears and we talked about movement. But we also have to consider that we want to evaluate the puppies when the puppies are around 8 weeks old. And it's, you know, sort of generally thought that looking at the puppies around 8 to 9 weeks old is the closest you're going to be able to estimate those puppies, how those puppies' proportions will be as an adult, and how you can look at the structure of the puppy and make a guesstimate as to how that puppy will be as an adult. So I've shown you on the right, this is a comparison. The puppy on the left, we have all of our descriptions on, and the dog on the right is an adult dog, and it is the same dog. So it's really interesting to me to look at. Now, there are definitely some overall differences stylistically, but I think the important things to look at are those two yellow angles on the front end of the puppy and the rear end of the puppy, and note how they look pretty similar between the puppy and the adult dog. And it's also something interesting to consider is that this animal that you're looking at in the picture is the grandmother of the puppies we're going to be evaluating today. So you can see there are differences. Her head has changed a little. It looks in the picture on the right like she has a lot more neck than she does in the picture on the left. A lot of that may be grooming, because on the right someone has cut a beautiful neck out so you can see her beautiful neck, and on the left she's just all fluffy and, you know, regular old fuzzy puppy. So, but this is why we want to evaluate puppies, is because we want to try to assess at this age before we make a decision on which puppy we're going to keep and which puppy we're going to place in a show home and which puppy is going to be a companion. We want to try to make our best guesses and our best estimates of which animal is going to have the qualities that we want to include in our breeding program. So this is why we're doing it. So now the first thing I would say to do, now we're going to put down our picture. When you're looking at puppies, is take as many opportunities to look at the puppies as you can. ahead. So definitely stacking the puppies and putting them on a table, which we're going to stack each puppy individually for you. That's super valuable. Moving puppies is valuable.
Could you go to the other end and call at them? Thanks.
Just watching the puppies in their natural form is very important too.
Apparently their natural form is baby gates, but there we go.
Right now they're just chilling out in the shade, but I consider this to be very important because there's always going to be a few puppies that are more comfortable on the table. And is that a good sign for those puppies being comfortable stacked in a show ring? It is. But on the flip side, we don't want to not consider a puppy that isn't as comfortable on the table. If you happen to be the owner of the litter of puppies, it's helpful to stack the puppies a few times before you try to evaluate them, because then the puppies will be more comfortable with stacking. But this kind of watching puppies in this kind of situation is really valuable because you can see things about the structure of the puppies, like which puppy is standing on its rear really comfortably, which puppy is standing up on the gates, which puppy's head catches your eye, which puppy's movement catches your eye. And so if you are considering a litter of puppies, it's important to try to get to see them as much as possible and just look at the puppies in their native habitat when they're comfortable, when they're playing, and look for things that catch your eye. Maybe you'll see a puppy whose hocks are a little long. Maybe you'll say, I don't like that puppy as much. Or maybe you'll see a puppy whose movement is driving away beautifully in the rear, and you want to remember that. And you want to try to connect it to when you actually are evaluating the puppies, how their structure on the table compares to how they're moving. And again, it's really useful to see personalities of puppies too. You can see who's relentlessly chasing a toy, who is, just taking a break in the grass and chilling out. Those can be very valuable pieces of information to consider when you're talking about puppies that you might have someone who wants to VN. So they want a dog that's going to be a great working dog as well as a companion, or a family that has several children. A dog that's extremely laid back may not be the best if you have a family that has 3 or 4 young boys who are going to be running and playing and chasing and are going to want the puppy to be running and playing and chasing with them. So I do think there's a lot of value in just taking the time to just look at the puppies as they play, as they walk, as they move. Don't just limit your evaluation to the time they're on the table, because everybody can have a bad day. So the very, very best person to evaluate your puppies, and this is gonna bring us to one of my first important rules, is that when you're evaluating a litter of puppies, you wanna get help from experienced people. If you're an experienced person, that's great, then you can hopefully help others. But it is extremely valuable to have someone who has looked at a number of litters of puppies help you look at a litter of puppies, whether you're going to purchase a show puppy or whether you're a new breeder. It's really important because I think it wouldn't be that hard, especially if you're watching videos like this and you're learning, to figure out how to decide which is the best puppy in this litter. Maybe based on what is important to you, like a really cute head or beautiful movement. But that's not actually very important, because when it's time to go to a dog show or it's time to enter the whelping box, we're not competing with only the puppies that are in this litter. We're competing with all the puppies in every litter. And when it comes time to place in a group or try to make that last cut at the national, then we have to compare these puppies to other puppies out there. And that's where someone who has a lot of experience breeding and evaluating puppies can be an enormous help in evaluating your litter of puppies. Because like I said, it may not be that difficult to assess this group of puppies and compare them to one another, but what we really want to do is compare these puppies to the Newfoundland standard, and we also want to have some insight into what other litters of puppies, Newfoundland puppies, might be like, so we know how these would stack up. Kind of a pun there, but okay. So now we're going to head over towards the table, and I'm going to point out the next rule, and I guess I should also say, Steve and I have long had a little saying when people talk about picking a puppy out of a litter. A lot of people feel strongly that they want to have the pick puppy, or they want to have the second pick puppy, or the third pick puppy. And I think it's kind of a funny statement, because one person's pick puppy in a litter will not necessarily be the same as another person's pick puppy in a litter. And for your particular needs, your pick puppy may be very different than somebody else's. And so Steve and I's saying is, who's doing the picking and what are you picking from? So who's doing the picking is what I just talked to you about, why it's important to have someone who is experienced help you and to try to see as many litters as puppies as possible before you're evaluating a litter. So one of the other things that I think is very important is never pass up the opportunity to see a litter of puppies that someone else has, even if you have to drive several hours. Especially extra bonus points if you can see that litter of puppies evaluated by an experienced breeder, or in ideal world, the breeder of those puppies. Definitely the person who is an experienced breeder and is looking at their own litter will be able to offer a lot, because they'll be able to have some insight into how this litter compares to other litters that they've seen in the past from their lines in their breeding program. And they'll have a lot of insight into what did the mother look like at this age? What did the father look like at this age? What did the mother's siblings or the mother's mother or the father's father? You know, how do these puppies compare? So we might have a better assessment then of how these puppies will grow up, what they'll look like as adults. So the second part of our little funny saying is, what are you picking from? So it's important to keep in mind that there are some litters of puppies where there could be 4 or 5 puppies that have extremely good qualities that would be great to include in a breeding program, that will be beautiful animals, that will end up being able to have multiples from the litter place at a national specialty. And there are other litters of puppies where even the standout puppy may not be a puppy that you want to incorporate into your breeding program. So it's very important to be objective. And this is where the what are you picking from comes from, is not all litters include show puppies. Not all litters include great working puppies. All litters include amazing companion Newfoundlands, and, you know, beautiful puppies from the perspective of Newfoundlands are all beautiful, but it doesn't mean that they may be an excellent example of the Newfoundland standard. So we want to keep that in mind. We want to try as much as possible to be very objective when evaluating our own puppies, because even though we've invested, you know, this particular litter now is just a little over 8 weeks old. And so Steve and I have invested, we did the breeding in January. We then watched the mother closely and kept her in the house and kept her quiet for 9 weeks. We did a cesarean section. We raised these puppies for 8 weeks. We're just now at the point now where we're ready to evaluate them. And, you know, we've been working on this since January, and we've invested a lot of time and honestly a lot of emotion in it. But it's very important to not let that get the best of you, because you need to be objective. And this is the key moment where it's very important to be objective. You know, snuggling the puppies and kissing the puppies, especially when they're little, is extremely important. But now you need to put all that aside. And even if there's someone who tugs at your heartstrings because their personality is just like hard eyes, you know, that's great, but it may not be the best puppy to incorporate into your breeding program.
Mulan's dead.
So now I've told you.
Oh, I just wanted, because one of the things you were talking about earlier in this context of what do you have to pick from was the idea of the depth. Like one standout puppy in the midst of...
Yes.
Yeah. So
No, that's a really good point, is that, you know, there could be a litter where there's a spectacular puppy. Let's say there are 8 puppies and there's one puppy that's a clear standout, and it's easy to say this is the best puppy. And you might want to keep that puppy, which it would be fine to keep that puppy. But I actually might myself prefer, from a breeding perspective, to take the 4th pick puppy out of a litter where there were 4 or 5 or 6 puppies that were all really nice. So when the litter has a depth of quality, that actually is, you know, where you want to really say, okay, look, this bitch was beautiful, but I couldn't decide between her and 3 or 4 of her siblings. That's a litter where I'd be very excited about getting a puppy, because the genes for your standout puppy also include the genes of all of his not so standout siblings, and the genes of your bitch who has 3 or 4 beautiful sisters that you couldn't decide between. That means that the genes are consistent from one puppy to the next, and you're going to be more likely to see those consistent results when you breed that bitch or that dog. So I personally, when people say they really, really want the 1st pick puppy or the 2nd pick puppy, I kind of smile to myself, because I'll absolutely take the 5th pick puppy where there are 5 bitches that you just can't even make up your mind because they're so nice. So that is the background. And the last thing I want to say before we start evaluating the puppies is that before you evaluate your litter of puppies, it is always of great value to read the Newfoundland Standard. So the Newfoundland Standard, we're going to have to obviously make some modifications because we're only looking at puppies here, and we're not going to be measuring like we did in our previous videos to see if they're 24 or 26 inches at the shoulder, obviously. And we're not going to be able to measure the bone in their legs and compare it to adult dogs, but we're still going to try to use as many pieces of information from the Newfoundland Standard as we can to apply to these puppies. And you know, the obvious thing we're first going to do is we're going to stack each puppy individually exactly as you would in a show ring, and that's the best way to see the structure of each puppy. And then if you go back to the picture that we attached to yesterday's post, we're going to use our hands to feel the parts of the puppy that we described, like the withers, the top line, the elbows, where are the knees, where are the hocks, how long are they? And we're going to look at how those parts relate to one another. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through these puppies one at a time, and we're going to introduce you to each puppy, and we're going to go ahead and go over each puppy, and we're going to do that first. And then at the end, we're going to look at the puppies moving. We went back and forth about whether we should look at a puppy on the table and then move it, but the problem with that is that we are still learning to use our stabilizer, so we decided that we would use a tripod for the portions where the puppy was on the table, and then we would move to the stabilizer portion after we were done.
So let's get this part set up.
So
and let's see if there's any comments or questions that are coming in. We're trying to watch them as they scroll through. Remember, it's quite a few seconds delay between the video from us to you seeing it and then till you type a comment. So if we don't see it right away, but we do have a trusty sidekick, Zach, over here, who's looking at any comments coming through, and we'll try to help you out there. All right, Who do we got first here?
Okay, this is Purple. So we're going to start with the girls, and sorry, I just knocked our table, but hopefully we're going to have more stable video here because we are using a tripod. So we're trying to learn from our previous errors. So this puppy is Purple, and Purple is a girl puppy. We're going to do our girl puppies first, and then we're going to move on to the boy puppies. So I'm just going to back this up a little. I zoomed in a little on Purple. Okay, so...
Don't zoom.
I know, I just wanted her to be bigger in the screen. I'm sorry.
Then move the tripod.
Okay, there we go. All right, so now I think you got a good view of Purple. Okay, so Steve's going to go ahead and point out some of the points on the puppy. But first thing I want to say is, according to the AKC standard, the general appearance of the Newfoundland, so big picture, is a large, heavily coated, well-balanced dog that is deep-bodied, heavily boned, muscular, and strong, which is all exactly what we want in a Newfoundland. But if you stop to think about it, there's not a lot there that's going to help us with puppies. You know, this puppy isn't large, this puppy isn't heavily coated, it's not really heavily boned, muscular, and strong. It's a puppy. So I'm going to have to say that one of the things we can refine on here is the well-balanced portion. So I think we hope in the future to do some videos where we talk about fronts and rears and balance. But since we haven't done those yet, I'm going to remind you that balance is a term that is used to describe how the front half of the dog and the rear half of the dog work together when the dog is moving. And I'm not saying we're not going to try to evaluate the coat, and we're going to try to evaluate the bone, and we're going to try to evaluate the musculature. All those things we're going to try, and the head. But in all honesty, the thing that we're going to be able to more consistently evaluate and we're going to see carry into this puppy as an adult is her structure. So I should also say the Newfoundland Standard does state that essential to good movement is the balance of correct front and rear assemblies. So what this means is those angles that I showed you on the puppy picture, those yellow triangles, were demonstrating the front and rear angles of the puppy. So Steve has his hands and he's trying to show you the angle of the front of this puppy. So let's point out the key spots. The first one is the withers. So point to the withers. The withers is really the shoulder blades. You want the withers to be further back at the bottom of the neck, and you want to then compare where the withers are to where the point of shoulder is. Yeah, so can you twist your hand so you're just pointing to the withers and the point of shoulder? Yeah, so you want, yeah, that's perfect. So you want to look at that that line there, and you want it to be sloping. You want the shoulders to be well laid back is what the standard says. So hers, could they be maybe a little more laid back? Yeah. They could. And then we also want to look at the angle between the point of shoulder and the elbow. So that's where Steve has his other two fingers. So the angle that we're talking about is the triangle that is described by the withers, the point of the shoulder, and the elbow. So you can see that it looks like there is, the puppy's gone. It looks like there is a more angled upper arm on this puppy, which the upper arm is the section between the point of shoulder and the elbow, and a little bit straighter angle, which, can you point to the withers again? I think you're a little high there. Yeah, between where the point of shoulder is and the withers. So that's how we're going to look at the front half of the puppy. And I should also,
how much space between shoulder blades?
Oh, that's a good question. So Zach told me someone asked about how much space between shoulder blades. There are a lot of people who feel that the shoulder blades should not be far apart. They should be close together. I don't know that I have ever gotten a great sense of how that correlates to the movement in the dog as an adult. I've definitely seen puppies where the shoulder blades were pretty close together, ones where they were further apart. In my mind, I would kind of imagine if you had a narrower dog, you could have shoulder blades that were closer together and that would be fine. Whereas if you have a broader dog, if the shoulder blades were really close together, I'm not entirely sure how the structure would all carry through to the elbows. One of the other things the standard says, which I was going to mention next, is that the elbows lie directly below the highest point of the withers. So you really want from the withers to be able to draw a line down to the elbow and down to the ground. And then
to answer that question, her shoulder blades are actually quite a ways apart, enough that I can feel her spine a bit between them, which maybe for us over the years is one of the further apart that we've seen. It's certainly not, oh, I'm struggling to get my finger in between them. So, I don't know, as far as meaning, I'm not quite sure. It's something we think about, but it's not something that I know that I can absolutely see translating to later movement. I think sometimes if they're straighter, in that the shoulder isn't quite as laid back, as a puppy we'll see that as maybe a little bit narrower in that width. Okay.
Do you want to stack her one more time?
I was just trying to give her a little.
Yeah, she needed a little break. Sorry, Purple's taking one for the team, and she's the puppy where I'm doing a lot of talking, so she has to stand the longest. Poor Perp. And so we also want to note that we want to see that the distance from the elbow to the ground is about half of the dog's height. So the elbow should be about at the midpoint. And the proportions and the structure of the puppy are going to be some of the things that we can most expect to see carry forward into the adult animal. So why don't we now turn her to face me? So we want the forelegs to be muscular and heavily boned. Okay, so, we can compare our puppy's bone from one puppy to the next, and we can also compare to our knowledge of previous litters, but more importantly, we want the forelegs to be straight and parallel to each other. So this is important. We want the forelegs to be, I want to see the feet to the elbows, everything to be in a big straight line there, and this looks good. We don't want any feet turning. Oh, honey, we're making the puppy look really bad. We may have future puppies whose feet, her forelegs look pretty straight. And we can also look at her head from this angle. Let's see, I'm going to tip a little bit here, and I will at some point zoom in when we get to eyes.
You can pull that closer to the end of the table too.
Yeah, we could try that. Let's try to move the tripod in a little so we can look at her little face. Okay, so with head, we're still looking at all the same things we were looking at if anyone watched the last video where we talked about heads. We want the head to be broad. We want the skull to be domey. We want the stop to be moderate, but we want to feel like there's a brow ridge that's going to make it look abrupt. We want the muzzle to be short. We want the muzzle to be square. We want it to be deep. We want there to be well-developed cheeks. We want the ears to be right at or a little bit above the level of the eyes. With puppies, you can't quite do the thing where you bring the ear into the inside of the eye. It doesn't quite work with puppy ears and puppy faces. We also want the puppy's eyes to be pretty far apart. And then we're gonna try, do you wanna take the gimbal and hold it closer? We won't do this necessarily with every puppy, but let's look at her bite.
Okay, I can't see on the camera, but
down a little.
There we go.
Okay, so we're gonna look at her bite. So with puppy teeth, in general, you want the bite to either be pretty much, and again, scissors or level bite, you want the bite to be pretty much lined up, or you want the puppy to be a little overshot. In the growth of the puppy, the final thing that's gonna grow in the head is gonna be the underjaw. So you wanna be worried about a puppy that is undershot. You do sometimes find in puppy bites that the mouth doesn't close all the way. You also sometimes find that the puppy fights you greatly when you try to look at the bite. One of the things you can do is you can look also at the side of the occlusion, and you really want to try to see these it's going to be hard because she's going to thrash. We can also look at another puppy then. There's
Stay.
3 teeth on the side, and you have 2 on the bottom that are pretty far apart.
Good girl.
I think she's getting hot.
Yeah, we'll do
We're
this in
gonna
the
do
shade
this on another
later.
puppy. Yeah, we'll look at it. We'll look at the occlusion on a separate puppy.
Oh, are we done with purple?
Oh, can we just look at her rear quick? Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. Purple is taking.
Getting hot.
Yeah, purple's
Yeah.
getting hot. But now we're going to look at the rear. And so the rear, you want to be, the rear assembly is, you want it to be powerful, muscular, heavily boned. Viewed from the rear, the legs are straight and parallel. This is where we're going to look at the hocks. And one of the things that we like to do is see how solid those hocks are. If you kind of squish them together like Steve just did, if the hocks seem to be very wiggly and weak, that is sometimes something you see consistent with longer hocks. So this is good where her hocks seem pretty stable. And just sack her one more time very quickly is if we're just going to quick look at the point of croup, where the knee is and the stifle. So the point of croup is right above right at kind of at where her pelvis is, where Steve's pointing. She's fighting us, so we're going to go quick. The stifle is basically the knee. So you want the thigh to be long and strong and muscled. And then we're going to go from the stifle to the hock. And Steve, can you point it with just your finger? Yeah, there's the hock. The hock is like kind of like our ankle. And so you want the both of the stifles and hocks to be well bent. So you kind of want 90-degree angles there. And you want the hocks to be perpendicular to the ground. And you want the hocks to be well let down, which basically means you want them to be short. So we're getting rid of purple now. All right, purple, thank you. You did a really good job there.
We'll clear up again a little bit later.
Yeah.
Who do we got next?
Yeah, so we kind of went over most of the highlights. The only thing that we didn't really get to before Purple decided to give up was that the neck should be long enough for proud head carriage.
We didn't
So,
really hit the top line yet either.
That's the last thing, is the neck and top line. So now we're going to move on to another girl. We're going to show you, I should have mentioned this, there are 5 girls and there are 3 boys in the litter. We're going to go through all the girls first, and then we're going to go through the boys, and then we're going to, from there, try to look at the puppies moving. So this is Yellow Girl. The Yellow Girl is, again, we're going to try to look at the same things we did before, but before we get into details what we looked at before, let's finish out with the last thing we didn't get to talk about with Purple, is that the neck is strong and long enough for proud head carriage. So it helps if you have a handler to adjust the...
All right. Can someone let us know if we're still live? Dejah's phone got too hot. Zach is texting. Dejah's phone got too hot because we just had it sitting in the sun. But let's see.
Yeah, back up.
Okay.
Right, can you come back over here?
Hold on one sec. Yes, but the gimbal has stopped doing its thing for some reason.
And did you take off you went off the mobile hotspot? You're back on Wi-Fi?
Yep. Yay, we seem to be back. Good. All right. Don't worry, you can all get a full refund of everything you paid for this video.
So I apologize. We are trying very hard to not have to avoid technical difficulties, but somehow we end up with something new each time. This time we tried to stabilize our internet by using my phone as a mobile hotspot, and it was sitting on the grooming table and it decided to overheat. So I guess it's good that the puppy got a break too, because she might have been overheating, and luckily the sun went behind a cloud, so yay. Okay, so we're back to Yellow Puppy, and we were going to talk about Yellow Puppy's top line, and Steve had told us that her top line felt a little soft. And again, this is something that we definitely need to put our hands on and feel. All these things, we can look at pictures, but really feeling them is going to be important. So let's point out where the back of the croup is. And so the top line is really from behind the withers to, can you point to it with your finger? Behind the withers to in front of where the pelvis is. And then that section behind the top line is the croup. So can you put your hand on her croup? Like let her tail down and put it across the top. Yeah, so that is her croup. So the croup is supposed to slope slightly away from the top line, and the tail set is gonna follow the natural line of the croup. Something that is important to notice is that in puppies, this litter is now kind of at the point where they're over this age, but in puppies that are 5, 6, 7 weeks old, some of their tails may seem like they're pointing like directly up. And so don't worry, just keep an eye on the tail, and you should see between 7 and 8 and 9 weeks that the tails start to come back down. If by that time you're not seeing the tails come down, you may be looking at a puppy whose tail set is incorrect. The Newfoundland tail is supposed to be carried kind of behind you like a flag as you run, or when you're just relaxed, it may lay down, or you may hold it out if someone keeps pulling on it. But you don't want a tail that is going to come up high and curve over your back. So now Steve is going to point out again where the stifle is, where the point of the hock is, and this is where we're again looking for the hocks to be short. So you can see she has pretty short hocks, maybe even a little shorter than Purple's hocks. Okay, so now now that I think we've gone through pretty much all of the standard things that we're going to look at with all of the puppies, let's now go and try to go over yellow puppy the same way we did Purple. So we're going to again start, and we're going to look where are yellow's withers.
Hers are up pretty high.
Hers are up pretty high. So maybe yellow's withers are pretty high. One of the things that's tough is that sometimes the withers is a bone that's maybe an inch wide. So whether you're feeling the top or back of that bone, but you want to feel the withers and then see where that point of shoulder is. So you can see there's some angle there, but it could be more laid back. And there's the elbow. But you can see we do still have a pretty even triangle between those three.
But notice it's a little broader. Yeah, Purple was maybe a little more like this, and yellow is a little more open, I think.
Right, so we might say that Purple has a little more laid back shoulder. And now we're gonna look, and it does also seem like yellow is maybe a little more deeply bodied than Purple, but I should also point out that Purple might have a slightly shorter coat. These are things that are not that easy to evaluate in puppies. And the other thing, going back to top lines that I was going to mention, is that top lines are one of the things that, again, your mileage may vary, but in my experience, top lines are one of the things that can absolutely change from little puppies as they get older. It's really important to consider that these puppies, depending on what time of the year they're born, depending on how much opportunity they've had to be outside running in a kennel area, how much muscle they're going to have, that's also going to impact their top lines. So if you have a litter of puppies that's born in the winter and it's very icy out and they haven't had an opportunity to really get out there and stretch their legs, you may find the top lines aren't as good, and you may also find that the muscling in the rears isn't as good. So this is something that you also want to consider.
Can we put it up for the front? Because there was a question that came about the front. Do you remember how that was phrased, Zach? I think it was from Mary Lou. And it was about breadth in here, because we didn't really get to talk about that.
Oh, that's right. We didn't talk about that in Purple.
In Purple, the breadth in here, and then are they easty-westy, and did that change? So one of the things that we like to feel in the front, do you mind if I'm...
Yeah, go right ahead.
Is you can feel this bone. It's on humans we call it a sternum. I think in dogs it's a manubrium. But anyway, it's the front of the chest in here, and you want to be able to feel that. It shouldn't be so recessed in there between the shoulder blades. You have to dig for it, and the more prominent that is, the more they're going to put in good chest muscle, which is going to be part of that good strong movement. Sometimes you might see if they're kind of narrow as a puppy, they might be a little bit like this, and then as the chest, people call it the chest drops, which they're growing, they're putting in muscle there, and as that chest drops, it sort of pushes out the elbows, and the legs end up a little straighter than they were maybe as a 5 or 6 week old
this
puppy.
is pretty much the question. So Ashley asked, do you find that a pup that's slightly easty-westy will be more true in the front when the chest drops, rather than a true front as a pup that toes in more when they're adult? So that's an interesting question. I actually think that sometimes, I guess it depends on how tucked in at the elbows the easty-westy puppy would be, because I also feel like sometimes puppies who toe in, when their chest drops, their legs sort of straighten out a little bit, because the chest comes in and takes up more space. This is one of the things that makes it harder to evaluate puppies, is because we have some things that we really expect to change. And
do you think it would make sense to move into the shade? It's a little sunny.
Yeah, we can definitely try.
Yeah. Or well.
Yeah, maybe even.
You're gonna get
Yeah, let's. You know what? We're gonna very quickly move ourselves into the shade so that we can keep the puppies in the game a little longer.
It's finally a nice day here in New England. We've had a really slow spring, so I guess we should rejoice that it's finally getting to be something else.
So rotate it 90.
There we go.
Okay, now Joanne and the puppies won't melt. And we can maybe get my phone back without it having another meltdown. Okay, awesome. This is hopefully going to be better because now the puppies will not be struggling with the temperature. Okay, so we're going to get a close zoom in on the puppy now. No, maybe we're a little too close to the puppy. Move it back slightly. Yeah, so we can talk about eyes with yellow. So, yeah, I think this is much better. We're gonna have a chance to actually.
Our handler was getting too hot.
Yeah, and let's see.
What did you do?
It's just I'm not seeing the very top of the puppy. I think
Well,
we're a little too. Yeah, we have to tilt.
let's-
Yay, that's better. Okay, so we were looking at the front of yellow. And one of the things we were talking about is between the legs. With a puppy, you should if you have a regular woman's small size hand like mine, you should probably be able, like Joanne will demonstrate, you should probably be able to get your hand between the front legs. It might just fit. I wouldn't expect it to be really much broader than that, but you also don't want it to be so narrow that you can't get your hand in there. So,
And my big, multi-generation dairy farmer hands probably have a little bit of tightness.
yeah. So again, it looks like her front legs are parallel. It does look like, we're not really seeing anything with her front that would really bother us from this angle. But why don't you take the camera and try to zoom in and we'll look at her eye. So a reminder, we want the eyes to be dark. We want them to be almond shaped. We want them to be deep set. So I think as a group, we don't probably need to zoom in on everybody's eyes, but I think as a group, these eyes are pretty dark. And I think her eyes are a very pretty shape. I think the almond shape that we want, which is preferred over a round eye, I think is really good. And if she's gonna be, since we're zoomed in on her face, do you wanna try to show her occlusion? Again, you can
the difficult
see,
occlusion.
maybe she's not the
Can you
best,
just stand on
best choice. And also,
just so she doesn't?
Oh, and we should say, you're hearing Dejah's voice and me once in a while, and you see Joanne's hands, but we got a whole team of people we need to be thanking for doing.
yeah, I always forget to thank at the end, but I guess this is a good point to thank Joanne, Zach, Jojo, Julia. This is not a video that Steve and I could make together. If we did it together, there would be a lot of yelling, and it wouldn't be nearly as good. So you can see that there are 2 teeth on the top and 1 tooth on the bottom that are sort of separated. And you want to try to see that the tooth on the bottom is between the 2 teeth on the top. And again, we can try to look one more time.
This is where we're talking, back in here.
No, it's right there.
Yes.
So there's 2 teeth here, and there's 1 little tiny tooth between. So ideally, hers is actually a little more forward of where you want it maybe. You want this tiny tooth to be between those 2 tiny teeth. So again, it's something that may or may not help you when you're looking at puppies' bites to try to assess whether or not they are going to turn out as an adult, because it's definitely no fun to spend a lot of time picking a puppy that really is exactly what you're looking for and then have their bite not consistently stay the way you want it to. Okay, so
Turn her to the rear?
yeah, so now we're going to look at yellow's rear. And actually, can we just stack yellow again one more time, because we actually did we go over
We can do her front angles. We can do that after.
we did her front angles but not her rear angles, I thought.
I thought it was-
Okay, but yeah, let's look at her from the back. Again, we want to see the hocks to be short. We want her rear legs to be parallel. Yeah, yellow maybe got too much sun, so hopefully now we're in the shade. The other puppies will be more accommodating. It's a little darker to see, but hopefully you can see it clear enough that her hocks are very parallel, and you can see that they're pretty short too.
They're tilted in maybe a little bit more than, say, purples.
Yeah, and again, you can do that squeeze test to see if there's any softness there. Yeah. Yeah, and so, exactly. So we also have to consider that yellow is a little bit bigger, heavier puppy than purple. So maybe yellow has some of more substance and bone, which may play a role in how tall she is, how long her hocks are. Okay, and we're gonna we're gonna try to stack Yellow one more time and look at her rear angles. So you can see that we have, let's point to her pelvis, croup,
Pelvis?
you know, where her croup is, and then where her stifle is.
Stifle?
And so that's going to be one of our lines of our angle, and then we're going to look at the point of her hock. So in an ideal world where we were talking about balance of the puppies, we want this angle in the rear to match the angle in the front. Because this means when the puppy tries to move, that as the rear drives and creates forward motion, that it will be able to propel the puppy forward as the front half of the puppy reaches forward. And importantly, we want to have a strong, pretty short backed top line, because that allows the front and the rear to work together, and we don't have any communication errors between the two. So I think
So it's kind of worth noting then, like if her front was maybe a little more open compared with here, it's in terms of balance, you know.
Yeah, so generally what you'll see is if we have front that is lacking in angles, and we can switch puppies now if you want, Joanne. I think Yellow's had enough. If you have a front that's lacking in angles and a rear that has a lot of angulation, you know, this is something that we hopefully will do a future video on movement, and we can discuss this, but you might have something which you might call overreaching, where the rear feet are, the rear power is a little bit too much for the front. And so you may see the rear feet overreach the front feet in a trot. And the same opposite thing can happen when you have a puppy that has a lot of front angulation, but the rear isn't as strong. So Cindy Flowers asked, do you only push hocks together, or do you also try to push hocks out? Also, what about slip hock? So I think we sort of squeeze them and then like push them both ways. Yeah, where they sort of pop forward.
Some of them kind of pop, and it creates such a straight line when it usually happens when there's less rear angle in the stifle. So when you do one of these,
You're pushing there and
you push forward, and it just kind of like almost hyperextends.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think it's important to wiggle the hocks in any direction that will tell you, you know, something about how stable the puppy is. And one of the things that I generally would say is if your puppy will stand in the position for a long time. Now, obviously, if your puppy is standing in the sun, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if your puppy will stand in the same position for a long time and is very comfortable in a stacked position, that's a good sign that your puppy is a good structure. And it'll help when you're at the National and the class has a lot of puppies, or you're at that last cut at the National.
The 9 to 12 puppy bitch class with 40 or something.
Those were the days. But anyway, or you're at that last cut at the National and the judge just keeps looking at the lineup. You want the dog that's not going to stop standing in that perfect stack. So you want a dog that is very comfortable standing in this position. So you can see here that Steve is pointing to the withers. So Silver looks like she might have a little bit more of a laid back front maybe than Yellow. And then you can see the angle that he's showing you with those 3 points to be the triangle. And then you can also see that we'd be looking, maybe we can feel her top line. Her top line looks pretty
nice and
solid. Yeah.
I don't feel the dip that I did on Yellow.
Yeah. And again, I think I was saying this when our puppies and our camera melted down before, so you might have missed it, is that top lines and heads are two of the things that, even though they're very important to try to evaluate, that we may really see change. We've definitely seen a couple top lines that were pretty weak that came out to be a perfectly level top line as an adult. So that's something that I would give the benefit of the doubt to. You know, there are some things that probably won't change, like a croup that is very sharply sloping or very, very flat. Both of those are incorrect. The croup should slope slightly and the tail set should follow it. I think this is a pretty typical croup. And you can see that Silver, you know, is Silver a little less comfortable maybe? Is Silver also maybe? You also have to consider the attitude and personality of the puppy. So this is where it comes back to the people who've looked at the puppies a lot. They may know that Silver's a bad puppy, and so that you may not get her to stand. And we definitely started with Purple because we thought she would be accommodating. Silver's hocks are pretty short though, so that is something that we were looking for. So why don't we turn Silver this way?
Front or rear?
Towards us. And the other thing that I guess we could talk about in one of the subsequent puppies is like the proportions again, because we didn't really talk about body length. So Silver I thought was interesting, and she's not doing it quite as much today, but Silver's a puppy where I sort of felt like a couple times when we stacked her previously that she might have been turning one of her feet out a little bit. Like if you see, it looks like her left front foot is a little bit inclined to turn out. And so this is the kind of thing that, your amazing handler can accommodate to some degree. But importantly, even though your handler can make it look good in the show ring, it's something that you don't necessarily want to introduce into your breeding program, something that, the puppy is going to convey onto its offspring. So now do you want to zoom in on her face?
Do you want to talk about this? Or the face?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we're feeling how much width behind, and for me, with my big hands, it's a little tighter than yellow, maybe more comparable to, say, purple, the width that we have here. And you notice when Joanne just kind of let her drop naturally, her legs kind of come in. They're not necessarily parallel. They kind of came in a little bit. So
it's more on the elbow. She's more inclined to tuck her elbow underneath her
Yep.
versus straight off of her shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do you want to zoom in a little bit on Yellow's or on Silver's face?
On her face?
Yeah.
Okay.
Silver does not want us to look at her face.
Okay, where's the puppy? There's a puppy. There's a puppy's eye.
Again, you can see her eyes are dark. They're a nice almond shape. Her ears look like they're pretty small. It looks like they're pretty much close to slightly above or at the brow.
She's a velociraptor.
She's like, let me just show you my teeth again and again.
Oh, somebody asked, what would be a factor in an off top line coming back? Angulation?
I think the biggest factor in an off top line coming back is conditioning. So one of the things that is really tough for puppies to evaluate is conditioning. So everywhere it says we want the front to be well muscled, we want the rear to be well muscled, we want the whole dog to be well muscled. But these are little puppies. There hasn't, been an opportunity to road work, and obviously you don't want to exercise your puppies too much. So one of the big things that I think can be a variability is the conditions in which the puppies were raised. If you are not in the middle of the winter and it's icy, as much as you possibly can, having the puppies have an opportunity to be outside on gravel or on a good surface where they can run and play will have your best shot at having them be in the best condition they can for evaluation. But as they get, as a mature dog, conditioning can really improve a top line. If you have a dog that has great muscle tone and is, walked and obviously not excessively road worked, but is in good condition. So I guess we can move on to the next puppy.
Did we do her rear?
Oh, yeah, we did.
The hockey bit?
All right, we'll do it again in case we forgot. I thought we did it, but maybe not.
Maybe we did. I don't remember.
I think we can go on to the next puppy. I think
Okay.
Silver's done with us.
Yeah.
Silver's done with us.
Okay, so that was the third girl puppy, I think.
Yeah, we did purple, yellow, silver.
Yeah, so we need gold
Now we
and
have
pink.
gold.
So gold, our next puppy is gold puppy.
She's very tired.
Everybody's good.
Like she had her face on the table.
Well, we'll see. Maybe gold puppy, if she's tired, will be a little bit more
Biddable.
biddable. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, here is gold puppy. And we are now going to look at gold puppy's front. So gold puppy's withers.
I'm going to go this side. So, there we go.
Yeah, maybe don't block too much. Okay, there's the gold puppy's withers. Just point to the withers. And then the point of shoulder. And then the elbow. So you can see that that's a pretty even looking triangle between those three. And again, it's a little harder to assess the neck because we have a lot of fuzzy puppy hair. We do the best we can to try to pull the head up and see the neck. But in puppies, that's a little challenging. So I guess now we think it looks like her elbow is below her withers. It looks like her front leg is straight from this angle. So let's look at her back.
Again, nice and solid.
Again, her back feels level. It looks level, but again, this is something that's really good to feel. And her croup is maybe a little more sloping.
A little more, yeah.
Sloping than the last puppy. And it looks like her tail set seems like a reasonable follow of that. And then looking at her rear, let's look at her
I like that flow.
point of her pelvis and the stifle. And again, we want to see that kind of angle that mirrors what we saw in the front. And
so even though she's maybe a little more open in the rear compared with the other two, it balances, I think, nicely with what her front is.
So somebody asked if you, is it normal for the rear legs to be mildly pigeon-toed in a 3 to 4 month old puppy? I would say not typically. With any individual, that could be the case. And it might be something that resolves, but it might be something, again, like rears.
I kind of would tie that into the weakness
Yeah,
of those Hocks.
it could be something where the Hocks could be a little stronger, but it also could be something that consistently has to do with conditioning. So if there's something, you can't change the skeleton.
Imbalance from the front to the rear
Yeah.
could cause, if it's more angulated in the rear, it could cause this to go out a little bit to compensate to match its front.
Absolutely. So once you've made the full commitment and you have the puppy, there are a lot of structural skeleton elements that you're not going to be able to change. You're done. And so Joanne can add to this if she likes, but I would say the very best thing you have now as a resource is conditioning. So if your puppy has deficits in its structure, the best thing you can do is to have your puppy in the best condition, or your adult dog in the best condition it possibly can be, so that your puppy can use its structure to the best of its advantage. So somebody asked, would you say that Gold Puppy has a better top line than Yellow?
And for today, yeah.
Yeah, so Steve says today, yes.
And
So
then,
that-
and
But I think Yellow's also a little bit heavier bodied of a dog, and she's a little bit longer. So this puppy might appear to be a leveler back because she's a little bit more compact, and the front angulation and the rear angulation are a little bit more well set under her at this age.
Yeah.
And I
And
think-
can I say something? So people really wanted to know what you said before about the pigeon toe in the rear, but can you talk louder? Because I think they can't hear you as well because you're further away from the camera.
So if maybe a puppy has a little bit less front angulation compared to a puppy that has a little bit more rear angulation, it might cause the rear leg to compensate by pigeon-toeing out a little to try to match the straighter front end. So if you're seeing it at like 3 or so months old, I would say at that point you probably just want to do more conditioning, walking, different
Surfaces.
grass, sand, gravel, anything to try to build those muscles up.
Yeah. And one of the things we're going to do when we're getting towards the end of the puppies is, this is something that could be really useful when you're trying to narrow down your favorites, is we're going to do a little comparisons where we put two top puppies on the table at the same time. So we'll get to that in a couple more puppies.
And I just want to add back with the top line question. We're seeing perhaps some differences in feel. It'll be interesting to see what we see when we move them.
Yes.
Like, do you see a softness in the top line when you're moving them, or not?
Yeah, and the slight disadvantage about how we're doing this is, I guess, if you have an ideal situation where you're able to evaluate the puppies any way you like, it actually can be useful to go over a puppy and then immediately put that puppy on the ground and move it, so you can try to see if the things that you observed when you were feeling the puppy structurally translate to what's on the ground. A lot of times you do see those things and you feel happy. And I can tell you, though, that there are occasional times where you love the puppy on the table and then you put it on the ground and you say, what on earth happened to this puppy? It's not doing what I expected to at all when it's moving. So now we're going to go back and look at the front. Again, it looks like Gold's front legs are straight and parallel. It looks like her front is pretty similar to the others, but you could put your hand in there and see, does it feel about the same or narrower?
About the same as the
Yeah.
last puppy.
And then do we want to zoom in a little bit on, sorry, I'm messing up the tripod. We're going to zoom in a little.
bit longer ear than
Yeah, she has a little longer ears, and actually maybe a little lower set ear.
yeah.
Like hers is more like even with her eyes instead
Yep.
of being even with her brow. And so this may end up being a head where we have like a sort of a longer lower ear.
And I would think it's a little hard to tell, but I think her muzzle maybe tapers more compared with the others that we'd seen.
Yeah, her muzzle might be a little bit less square. It might be a little narrower. It's still a pretty face, but maybe we would give the edge to Yellow or Purple's face. And maybe we'll look at a couple of the faces together, stacking two or three puppies.
Comparing maybe like Silver with Purple's face.
Yeah, would be really good. And we could, since we have several people, this is hard to do if you don't have several people, we can stack a couple puppies together and look at their faces together and try to evaluate. Because, it's still definitely a pretty face, but we still want to compare it to the other puppies here as much as we still want to compare it to the standard. Because we don't want to, what if we have 3 beautiful heads we still might want to pick the best head, but we want to consider, you know, whether or not all of these puppies are good examples of what we would expect for the Newfoundland Standard to ask. Okay, so do we want to look at Gold's rear? Okay, so Gold from the rear. Again, her rear legs look quite quite solid, and Steve says that the hocks are not wiggly feeling. Her hocks maybe look like their hair longer to me, but it's hard to tell from this angle. But again, we also have to consider the height of the overall puppy too, because if we have a bigger, taller puppy, which I think we may have a good example of this in the boys, we might expect the hocks to be longer. So we might be a little forgiving on that, but we still would like to see the hocks be more solid, not floppy or wiggly. I don't have good technical terms there.
Floppy.
So someone asked to talk a little more about conditioning, which she says she assumes we mean strengthening besides walking on different surfaces. So I'm going to toss that one to Joanne for suggestions. You can use a treadmill, which again, I wouldn't recommend that with a dog. No.
In general, Newfoundlands, I feel like natural exercise is going to be more beneficial. Slopes, hills, up and down, different.
Sand is
great because especially it can tighten up like wide splayed feet. It can help strengthen all of those foot muscles and into
the pasterns
and build all of that up, which will just translate all the way up. But definitely playing outside, natural movement. If a dog is running, the only conditioning you're doing is running on a treadmill, you're gonna get. I see that you get a weaker top line with strong rear muscles and strong front muscles, but they almost tend to carry their neck forward and down, and you lose a little bit of the natural muscling in the back because they're not getting that side to side motion that strengthens all the other side muscles. You're just conditioning one series of muscles versus strengthening everything as a unit.
And somebody asked, what about swimming?
Swimming's great.
Swimming is great. That's definitely amazing if you have the opportunity for it.
Especially in this breed. But I would say more natural, playing in like a big paddock or grass, hilly area, up and down. Swimming.
Everyone needs to move to Northeast Connecticut where it's all ledge, sand, and gravel and ponds.
Right.
Okay, so now we're going to let Gold go. So someone said, do you find water treadmills better? I think water treadmills are great. And if you have that opportunity...
Who's got one?
Yeah.
Got to go to
That
Colchester.
buoyancy in the water that helps strengthen all those side muscles that you wouldn't really trigger if you're just using a regular treadmill.
Yeah.
And also, when you run them on the treadmill, you're going to... Typically, it has some sort of a slope to the dog treadmill. So they tend to be running a little bit uphill. So then their head needs to come down to compensate for that angle and that slope. But what the water treadmill does is it brings that head up because they need to keep it out of the water. And then you get the natural buoyancy from the water. So you're strengthening all of the other things, keeping everything in the proper way that they should be carrying themselves when they're on the ground versus head down, forward, and then they kind of strengthen the muscles that keep this a little bit dipped and strengthen a big thigh, big second thigh, big shoulder muscles, but then you leave out all the other aspects.
Yeah, that was really a good question and good answer. And definitely you don't want to start trying to do anything more than, natural play until they're definitely over a year, if not over 18 months or 2, which is when you're really seeing their growth plates close and they're getting their adult, size and structure. So now we're moving on to our last girl puppy. This is Pink Girl. And you can see that Steve is feeling the withers of Pink Girl and also her point of shoulder and her elbow. Maybe a little bit less angulation here in this puppy.
Yeah, shoulders aren't as well laid back.
Shoulders aren't as well laid back in this puppy.
Is back further than the withers.
So
the
this
angle itself is nice and 90 degrees, but it's instead of being like this, it's...
Yeah, so this is a puppy where it might be a little upright in the shoulder, but it has some angle to the upper arm. And again, your mileage...
That also shortens.
yes, it shortens her neck a little bit, and although your mileage may vary, I have found in the past that this is the type of animals where you a lot of times might see swinging in the front because they're upright in that shoulder area, and then they have a lot of angulation in the upper arm, but they don't really have any control over it, so it's a lot of give there. So now we're going to feel her top line.
Nice and solid.
Her stop line feels solid.
And they're all level. They're not, other than, they're not sloping down. They're not sloping like this.
Yeah,
They're
and
nice
what about her
horizontal.
croup? Her croup looks a little flatter, yeah. So her croup looks a little flatter, and when Steve put his hands on it, you can see that it is a little flatter. It's funny is that you're not necessarily seeing it now, but her croup is a little flatter, and I actually have observed that she's one of the puppies who carries her tail the highest. It's been coming down a little bit, like I said, but her tail has been the highest, the longest, so that might be consistent with her having the flattest croup. So you want to show us where her stifle and her hock are. So her point of croup, stifle, hock. She looks like she has pretty good rear angulation, and she also looks like her hocks are pretty short.
Yeah.
She doesn't exactly want to stand, but why don't we turn her towards us? Okay, I think for the most part, all of the puppies' front legs look parallel, and again, this might be another example like we saw with the last puppy who was silver, with the slightly lower ear set.
Gold was the lower ear set.
Yeah, slightly lower ear set, but it does look like she has about the same breadth of her chest. And do you want to zoom in a little bit on her head? Her muzzle may be a little narrower as well. She still has a pretty cutesy face and a pretty eye shape. The almond shape of her eye is very pretty, but her muzzle might be a little narrower, and she might have a little less in her cheeks than the other puppies, and you can see that maybe Joanne's giving her a very unflattering look there. She might have a little narrower head, not as domey, not as broad her skull. So this is something that we'd want to consider strongly. And then do we want to look at her rear?
Sure.
Okay, here's her rear.
I feel like
Touching on the rear.
Okay, and somebody asked, is there a way to help a narrow rear? So, again, unfortunately, I'm going to have the same answer. I would say conditioning, and for a narrow rear, I would say that's one where, like, walking on different surfaces like sand, just to strengthen those thigh muscles as much as possible, is going to help you as much as anything. Well, that's going to be your best.
There's part of me that thinks the way to help a narrow rear is in the whelping box.
So another good way to help a narrow rear is to remove it from your breeding program.
I don't know that any amount of conditioning is going to turn something into like a perfectly widespread solid.
No, that's a good point. But I definitely think that conditioning is the thing that will help you make the most out of the animal you have. But then, even though we're evaluating these puppies now, you should never stop looking at your puppy and evaluating it at any point. Even when it gets to that stage where the puppy coat all falls out and it's not cute anymore, even when it gets to that stage where it's in a gawky growing spurt and it's either really long or really tall, keep looking at your puppy all the time to see how things are changing and what you like and don't like about the puppy. So, ready to move on to the boys?
We got Mr. Blue?
Yeah, so now we're going to move on to our 3 boys. We made it through the 5 girls. So now we're going to move on. We have 3 boys in this litter, and the first puppy we're going to look at is Blue Boy. Blue is a little tired. Blue got the first bath, and Blue was not appreciative. So, we'll see if he's still angry with us or not here.
He's pretty forgiving.
Okay, Steve thinks he's forgiving. I'm not always sure. Okay, so this is the Blue Boy. And you can see Steve's going to show us his withers and show us his point of shoulder and show us his elbow. And it looks like that makes a pretty nice angle between those three. And it looks like we have a little more neck. Blue Boy, one of the things to note, has a little more coat. So it looks like his butt is a little high. A lot of that is hair. So this is a situation where you can look at the length of coat and say this puppy, like maybe the extremes, maybe Purple has the shortest coat and Blue has a longer coat. I don't know that I'm the best person to say how well that carries into adults, but it's still something that I would note here. So how does his top line feel to you?
His top line feels good.
His top line feels level, and what about his croup?
Nice.
His croup is slightly sloping.
It's not flat,
Doesn't
not
seem too
steep.
flat or too steep.
Tail set seems good.
Yeah, and so then let's look at his point of the croup and the stifle and the hock. So he looks like he has a nice triangle in the rear that matches pretty well with his triangle in the front. His hocks,
more than the girls.
yeah, are a little longer than the girls, but he's taller.
Boy.
Maybe he is a tiny bit longer in body than some of the girls. You know, maybe we would measure and see how his length and his height, you know, at his withers compared, but that's something to consider. And then do we want to turn him towards me?
Okay.
And maybe we'll try then to put him up with another boy puppy as well to compare some things.
Nice breadth. Nice parallel front legs. We didn't talk about substance in the girls, but you know, nice substance.
And how about between his legs? How about his chest?
Yeah,
And Steve can actually
feel
get his hand.
Nice sternum here, and I can fit my hands in.
So he's a pretty broad puppy. And do you want to take the thing and zoom in on his face?
I shall try.
Iris shape.
Yeah, so somebody asked about more of a D-shaped iris. I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure what that means. Maybe if it was
Well,
Fran.
what's a normal shape?
Oh,
She's
normal
noticed
shape
some that
for
are
the
D-shaped.
iris.
I don't think I ever noticed them being anything
Eye shape
but
is almond,
Round.
but
Yeah, the eye shapes should be almond, but I don't know. I've always noticed them to be pretty much round.
inside of it.
Yeah.
looking at him top down.
Can you see his little face?
Little wet
Maybe
patch.
back a little. He looks like he has a lot of cheek to him, and his muzzle looks pretty square. The cheek makes his face look very round. His ear set also appears to be about at or a little bit above his eyes, so that is pretty correct. It's not as low as a couple of the girls was, and his head is pretty broad. His eyes are pretty far apart. He looks pretty cute in the head evaluation. They're all cute though, of course. He has a nice stop. Okay, so let's turn around and look at his rear. This is all jankety now. Okay, now we're looking at his rear, and you can see that he is standing pretty solidly on his rear. His legs are parallel. His hocks are pretty solid.
Yeah.
And his hocks look pretty short relative to his size. Andy asked what's their average weight right now. We haven't weighed them for a little bit. I would
like
say
3 or
they're
4 days.
they're probably getting close to 20 pounds. You know, I would say they might be 17, 18, 19 pounds. Generally, if I was going to say, I wouldn't say as a group that these puppies were huge puppies relative to some of the litters we've had in the past. But I also will say that, you know, that's something that is a little harder to assess because in a larger litter, you're going to have puppies that may or may not have gotten as much nourishment. If there were, let's say there were 2 or 3 puppies in the litter, it may also have something to do with the quality of the mother's milk. Some mothers seem to have super rich milk, and other mothers have enough milk, but it's not as, maybe doesn't have as much fat in it. And then the last thing is, you know, all these puppies may end up not being that big, or maybe they will be. But the things that I would take into consideration is how the puppy's size compares to the other puppies in the litter at this point. And then I would also look at the size of the parents. Those are going to be your best bets for what the overall size of the puppies will be as adults. Okay, so we good with blue? We're going to move on to red puppy, I believe. Okay, this is red puppy.
Red style in a 3/4 angle.
Okay, this is red puppy. And you can see that Steve's going to show us where the withers are on red puppy. and where the point of the shoulder is and the elbow. So it looks like it makes a pretty good angle, maybe not quite as much layback as on Blue Puppy.
Yeah.
Maybe also a little less neck then.
Yep. Yeah, the elbow's back a little further than the withers.
And then we're going to feel the top line looks very solid, but we're going to try to feel it. Red is not very accommodating. Red is decided he was enjoying his nap and he does not care to be stacked.
It's a secret. Top line feels probably the most solid.
See, maybe this is one of the most solid top lines. And then what about his croup? Like it almost looks like it might be a little flat, but it's hair.
Wow.
Yeah, so again, this is, you got to really feel these things because the hair will deceive you every time. The tail set seems to follow the croup. And what about his point of croup to his stifle and his hock? It looks like he has a shorter dimension from his point of croup to stifle and a little longer from the stifle to the hock.
Yeah, so he might be able to get in a lot of
Muscle there.
His hocks are pretty nice and short.
But his knee is up pretty high. Like I would like him to maybe have a little longer thigh.
More bend of stifle.
Yeah, like, and more, that would give him more bend of stifle. Okay, and so then his hock is a little longer than Blue's. So let's
A smidge.
just a smidge. So, and he, I don't know, he might be a little square or he might be a little taller. I guess we have to set them side by side. So let's look at the front of Red. Okay, we can see that Red
He's narrower.
is narrower than Blue,
Can you feel that?
and he looks like he might be a little higher on leg.
Tucking his elbows in.
Tucking his elbows in because I think this is a little
Is a little
it's
narrower.
Not, it's not laid back as well underneath him,
Yeah.
so it's kind of too forward placed. So he wants to kind of
Pinch
put-
his elbows in a
pinch
little.
his elbows to put his grip.
But at least we can see that his front legs are parallel, and his, let's zoom in a little on his head. His eyes are pretty far apart. Again, I think as a group, the eyes are dark and the eyes are a nice shape. And I like the eyes. You do see lighter eyes. You do see eyes that are more round.
Top
You can
down.
see he has a broad skull. His ears actually look a little higher, so maybe a slightly more correct placement than some of the other ears. His ears are a little more at the level of his brow. And you can see that his muzzle is also pretty square and pretty cute. He is not very accommodating, but he's trying. And then do we want to go and look at his rear?
Sure.
Okay, so now we're back to the rear. And again, we see his hocks look parallel.
Nice and solid.
They're very solid. They don't wiggle a lot. We can see that maybe they're a tiny bit longer than Blue, but like I said, this is where we'll try to do a little comparison.
I don't know that we really had anybody where they were like this.
No.
They can't even do that. But, they're nice and there's breadth there. They're not...
Yeah.
There's good daylight between those hocks as they're standing. They're not ready.
Yeah.
So.
His tail maybe looks a tiny bit short to me. Yeah, it just meets his hock. You may find in some litters that the tails look really longer or shorter. I don't, again, know how much that correlates to tail length as an adult. The tail is supposed to meet the point of the hock. All right, so we're going to move on to the last puppy. And then we're going to, like I said, we're going to do a couple puppy comparisons, which is when you're narrowing down your favorites, the kind of thing you might do when you're evaluating. And then we're going to move the puppies at the end because we're going to take the tripod away and we're going to do our best with the movement, but we're hoping we've learned a few things. We've been trying to understand how to use the gimbal stabilizer a little better.
That we didn't play video games with joysticks, and we don't know how to use joysticks.
Yeah, so we're gonna learn, and hopefully we're gonna maybe do a couple videos, one where we talk about fronts and one where we talk about rears, and then we'll have some more time to learn how to use the gimbal before we try to talk about movement. Okay, so this is Green Puppy, and he's the last male puppy. He's the largest puppy in the litter, and he's also probably the tallest puppy. So he had a pretty decent looking angle there when Steve showed it off in his front.
Yeah, I would say maybe the withers are a little forward to the elbow.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting is, like, point out from the back where his elbow is. He has a longer length of leg, because look how much, if you point out where his elbow is, see where Joanne's finger is, it actually looks like it might be a little bit more from that point to the ground than it is from the withers to where his elbow is. So that's something to consider, is that he's a little higher on leg. but maybe a little bit more leg. I know a lot of people prefer more leg, but maybe more than the standard asks for in this case.
His top line's good.
His top line's good, but maybe
it's
not as solid as
the two
red.
other boys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe more like towards yellow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what about his croup? Is it a little flatter? Is it slightly
No.
sloping? Okay, his
Seems
croup is
good.
slightly sloping. And then now we're going to look at the point of the croup to the stifle. And then, yeah, so this again looks like pretty good angles. His hock looks a little longer, but it's important to note that his hock's a little longer than blues or reds, but he's also a little taller. So we might expect his hocks to be a little longer. So I guess let's turn and look at his front. So green puppy, you can see, wants to turn his left front foot a tiny bit out. His legs still look like they're relatively parallel, but his feet are a little bit turned out, maybe a little east-west looking.
He's not as broad as blue, but
And he looks a little narrower overall.
yeah.
Like when we look at him from the front here. How is it between his legs?
It's a little tight.
And Joanne said it's a little tight between his front legs. So he's a taller, narrower puppy overall. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit on Green's head quick.
Hey, there's a puppy.
And you can see his ears, again, look a little larger and possibly a little lower. And you can see that his head,
Probably the lowest.
yeah, his ears are probably the lowest. And his head is a little narrower, but keep in mind that his ears being lower makes his head look narrower as well, because when his ears are when the ears are appropriately placed, they round out the whole picture of the head.
Sorry. Close on my face. Puppy
So
running away.
now zoom in maybe on his muzzle a little bit. His muzzle might be a little narrower than Green or Blue's muzzle. And then let's turn him around and look at his rear. Sorry, somebody asked how old are they? They are 8 weeks old. They were 8 weeks and a few days. So now we're looking at his rear, and you can see that his hocks are still pretty parallel, but
He's got a big rear angle.
he's got a lot of angles, and he's got a longer hock. So maybe squiggle his hocks and see how Joanne is squeezing his hocks and they're squishing. It's like when you squeeze the Charmin. So this is the kind of
Back
animal.
in the days when we had
Back in the days when you could get Charmin. Now you have to just take whatever toilet paper you can get. But leaving that aside, you can see now she's pushing them out like was asked before. So see, there's a lot of flexion there. And again, like as a dog is older, could this be improved by conditioning? They definitely could. But on the flip side, would I prefer to see a shorter hock that was more stable? Absolutely. So this is the kind of hock where we might want to look when we see Green moving, that we might expect to see him move in a little bit of a cow-hocked fashion, or have his hocks at least be closer. We would really like to have the hocks be very parallel when the dog is moving, with a leaning towards a single tracking. So if anything, we want the hocks to be parallel, or the top of the hocks to be further apart than the feet are.
Did you want to compare anyone against Green?
Or should we just do blue and red?
Blue and
Yeah.
red?
So
Okay.
why don't we quick put blue and red up? We're going to do a couple quick comparisons.
And then, was there any other, like, if there's any particular
Yeah.
comparison they'd like us to?
Yeah, so we're going to do some comparisons. And so if you have any comparisons or questions at this point before we start moving puppies, let us know. While we still have some stability in the video.
Side to side.
I want first in a row.
Okay.
So first we're going to stack.
You need to back up.
No, actually I got them both. Okay, so this is red puppy and blue puppy together. So now we're going to compare red puppy and blue puppy, and it's interesting because it's not exactly what I thought when I looked at red puppy versus blue puppy in my mind, how they compare.
This is why it's so good. Useful.
Yeah, so this is why this is really useful. Now, red puppy is fighting us a little bit, but red puppy looks to me like he is a little tiny bit taller and possibly a little shorter backed, but not as much as I thought he was going to be. His hocks, I think that his hocks are a little shorter than blue puppy's, and maybe blue puppy looks like he has more neck, but also he might also look like he's being more accommodating. So someone has asked for us to compare purple and gold, and we definitely will. So top line comparisons here.
Got a runner.
Do you want to compare their top line, Steve? And we're going to do purple and gold. Purple and gold is a really good suggestion because I think it would be interesting to see if there's a difference in coat and size, and then also the heads of purple and gold.
See, standing next to I think red looks a little longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I really thought blue was going to look
But he's also
longer
tall.
until I see
But
them.
He's a little taller, but also the placement of
Yep.
this front angle.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is
Pushing
straighter.
his elbows out because there's not
Yeah.
much layback. This puppy has a little bit better
absolutely.
layback and a better prosternum.
The other
Where it
thing
needs to be.
that we need to note is really important here is that Blue is probably, in my opinion, the more balanced puppy, because if you look at Blue, you can see that he has the rear angulation that is more consistent with his front angulation, where we said Red was a little more upright and straight in the front. And you can also see that he also has a little bit more of a sort of a over-angulated rear, but not as much bend of his stifle. Like, he seems like he's a little too straight through the stifle. So Cindy Flower said, can we compare the width of them?
So,
Yeah, so let's look at them from the front.
did you want to say anything about the idea of a pick and like the
Oh, we did
silliness?
say that
But also like,
earlier.
Like here,
Yeah.
there's some things we're liking better on one puppy. Some
Yeah.
things we're liking better on another.
Yeah, so this is where
How
we
do you say one
come
is-
back to what
yeah.
I said in the beginning. So I didn't exactly talk about it in the beginning, but when we look at the pick, another thing, if you're actually a breeder, not just looking for a show dog, to strongly consider in pick is, what do you need in your breeding program? So you might pick the puppy with the best head because your breeding program is lacking heads. Or you might pick the puppy with the best rear or a really solid top line because you know that's a weakness in your general breeding program. Another thing that's really important to consider, and the breeder has like extra bonus points here, is that to know what the parents are like. So if I had a puppy that was beautiful otherwise but was lacking in rear, and I knew that its mother was lacking in rear, and I knew that its mother's mother was lacking in rear because I owned all 3 generations, then I would definitely be looking for the puppy in the litter with the very best rear, because you know as a breeder what you're trying to improve in your line and where you're coming from looking at the litter. So talking about a pick for someone who's looking for a show dog versus someone who is looking for a breeding animal. So one of the things now, Red is trying to make his front legs easty-westy. Red is definitely fighting more, and Blue is a little more accommodating.
But
Do you
that's
want to
that
take
aspect of
the...
watching them and getting a sense of their
Yeah.
personalities?
And so to be honest,
What do you want me to do?
go over the... Cindy wanted to see comparing the width. So let's look at
Okay.
the top of them quick.
Oh, Cindy,
To look at the width.
like you're asking for advanced maneuvers.
Yeah, we're not so sure about this, but I do also want to point out that the personality, so Red is being bad here, and he's making it hard for us to evaluate him as easily as
Go around to the
evaluating
other side
Blue.
and take Blue.
But something to keep in mind is a lot of times in a
He's
show
being better.
dog, a lot of attitude is a good thing. If you have a handler who can work that to their advantage. A dog like maybe Blue is a little laid back, and will that not work to his advantage? He may be more biddable. He might be a better companion for working events, but it might mean that he just sort of stands there in the show ring, and that Red's personality might be more look at me. And this is something that you may consider as a trade-off, because if you have an absolutely beautifully structured puppy that's just going to stand there sort of uninspired in the show ring, it's going to get beaten by a puppy who may not be quite as correct, but is going to be the entire
Screaming, "Look
time
at me."
saying, me, pick me. So it's always something to look for. Sometimes the bad puppies are the puppies that you get drawn to. So why don't we compare?
Wait, Cindy says hand on rib cage, please.
Oh,
Thank you for
from the
saying
top?
please.
No, we appreciate any.
Yeah, do you mean from the top, Cindy? Oh, length of rib versus loin? Maybe that, yeah.
You want
Okay.
to set them sideways.
Okay, I'm going to come back around this way. There's one puppy getting set up. So yeah,
This puppy's rib cage ends about here.
could you say it louder?
This is the end of the rib cage.
Okay,
So this is
The
loin.
loin.
And then on Blue,
that's in his rib cage. And that's
so Blue is shorter loin.
They both have a relatively significant amount of loin. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, a longer rib cage is better. A shorter loin is better. And it's funny is before we did this evaluation, I might have said I thought red was a little shorter backed. So this is what's interesting is that looking at them on the table is informing me, whereas when I just looked at them in their natural habitat, as like when we started, when they're just running around, my perception was that red was shorter backed.
Can you say something about the spring of rib as you're feeling them? Like who seems to be more slabby versus nice and barrely?
I think they're about the same.
pretty comparable?
About the same.
Blue might be a little bit.
Yeah.
So about the
Little
same.
more.
Blue maybe a little bit more. And I'm going to try to swing around just a little bit closer. And then, sorry, honey, you were saying something.
And then the last thing I was going to say is that there are other factors that may have weighed into my impression, is that maybe my impression that red was square was because red moves and holds his head up more and it makes his body look squarer, whereas blue, and I'm not saying this is the case, if blue walks around with his head down more, he may end up looking overall longer to me.
Okay.
So that's kind of an important factor to consider. Which is why, is I think just looking at the puppies doing what they're doing, playing, is also extremely valuable. So
do you want to get the other two girls?
we had a request to see gold and purple together, and we can do gold and purple, and then maybe we could like swap out for yellow.
So somebody said, what about spring of rib to define depth of chest? I guess I would kind of put them, they're related, but I think of spring of rib as a width more, and how sort of barrel-y in profile, and then depth of chest is just how deep that rib cage descends to the elbow. Anyone else want to chime in?
Fine.
Yeah. All right, who do we got here?
Can I?
Purple and gold.
Okay.
Okay, can I go back to here and you go back to there? Okay, so we've got purple and gold, and you can see that maybe gold is not quite yet lined up with purple. So you can see that purple is she a little higher on leg? I don't know. They're more similar than I thought they would be. Yeah, they're both like, wait, I was napping and I didn't want to come out again. I think you can see that gold has a little longer coat than purple. Purple's coat still looks a little short to me. I want to say this is something interesting, is purple has the appearance of having a little more neck, but some of that could be because purple has a little less coat. Purple is a little taller, but not a lot. And I maybe think that purple has a little better rear angulation, bend of stifle and hock. But again, this is one of those things that is difficult to compare. We got to get gold. Again, the puppies now at this point have decided round 2, I'm not interested. The girl puppies had all gone to sleep, of course. Okay, so maybe gold is standing on her front a tiny bit better, but purple has more leg under her for sure, even I think beyond the coat thing. One of the things I thought would be interesting is to compare their heads too. So why don't we face them towards us? And I feel like one of the things that makes, both heads are very cute, but one of the things that makes Gold's head kind of appealing to me is I think Gold's ears are higher. Purple's ears are a little lower. But Gold's eyes...
She has a little bit wider of a top skull.
Gold does? Yeah, so Gold may have a little wider of a top skull than Purple. And again, Purple's ears being a little lower is making her head look a little narrower.
But I think that's where that is playing from.
Yeah.
She's a little bit less top skull, so it's letting her ear set
Exactly. Now, of course, if they were in a super excited mode and held their ears up, it would help us. But let's just turn them around quick and compare their hocks, because clearly, hopefully, we'll have enough energy left for a little bit of puppy movement. Yeah. And so Gold looks a tiny bit. Andy said that Gold looked a little wider in the front, and she actually also looks a little wider in the rear. So Purple might be a little bit narrower puppy overall.
But I like how Purple's rear is parallel compared with...
Yeah, and Gold is standing a little awkwardly right now. So Kelly Benedict asked, white tip on the toes, white on the chest. Would you pass up a good puppy because of too much white on the feet? No. Never. Not in any circumstance. Color is secondary to everything else, unless you're talking about colors that are not allowed by the standard. So color is secondary to everything else. The other thing I didn't mention when we were going over them is that yellow has a very slight kink in her tail. Again, unless it was a major kink or multiple kinks, that's also something where I would not consider it to be a deal breaker for me. I would think it would be something I would want to keep in my mind. Again, back to the parents, like if I had a mother who had a little tiny kink in her tail and her daughter who had a little tiny kink in her tail, then maybe the next one would be where I'd say no more kinks in the tails. But it's not necessarily something where I would rule out an animal that had other qualities that made it a great example. Okay, so I guess, do we want to see any more comparison? You know what, can we take for one more minute, keep gold and get yellow instead of purple? So we're just going to do yellow and purple, or yellow and gold quick. And then we're going to move on to, hopefully we can wake the puppies up with a toy and get them to move.
And I should check my battery.
We're going to make it work.
We'll make it work.
Okay.
I'm fully charged before we started.
Yeah, we're fine. Okay, we're coming out with the last two puppies here. And this is gold and yellow.
Yellow got a little bit.
Yellow was playing in the water bucket a tiny bit.
She heard that swimming is great conditioning.
She was starting in on her conditioning program. Okay, so this is, again, interesting is that I think yellow might be a hair longer than gold. But
Yep.
I do think I might like, I don't know. Actually, it's pretty close. These are similar. I was going to say that I might have liked the bend of stifle on yellow a little better, but it's not bad on gold either. Yellow.
You said was the least bend of stifle though?
I don't
Was it
know,
gold
but
or was that silver?
and yellow, Steve had said her top line wasn't quite as solid, and you can see that now she's more tired and she's fighting a little more, and you can see that sort of coming out even a little more than it did before. So why don't we turn them towards me? But I do think now this is the most fun part, is now we're really picking at details, because I think we have two puppies that we like. And so we're really trying to see, like, of the two, which one do we like better? They both look pretty solid in the front. You can see that yellow has the tiniest tinge of white, not much, not any significant amount, just a cute amount. And now we're gonna go in and like zoom in a little bit on their heads. So let's try to look at yellow and gold. Oh, yellow's done. Okay, so I think one last thing, let's turn them around and then we'll just be done with the comparisons. Yellow is ready for her nap now.
Yeah. Well, and that's something, again, with the personalities. I think we've noticed yellow is more laid back.
Yeah, and yellow seems a tiny bit more solid again on her rear than gold. I feel like gold looks like she's sort of stretching out of her hocks a little more, and yellow's more solid on hers. But I don't know about the length. What do you think, Joanne? Okay, so yeah, so maybe we have a little bit longer,
This one has a little bit
longer
on the-
stifle
Oh,
to
sorry.
hock.
compared to
Yeah, I think you might be
this.
right. I
So
think
that's why she's standing. This one's standing a little bit
Yeah.
better on herself because there's not as much
yeah.
to compensate
Mm-hmm.
for.
Okay. Yeah. So this is really good. So, okay, this has been great. I think comparing them, and again, like you can compare 2 or 3 or 4, and this is what I would do is I would sort of start setting puppies aside that aren't your favorites and comparing the ones you really like to see which qualities are better. And you may find some surprising things like blue and red. The comparison wasn't quite what I expected. So I think this is really valuable. So I think we're now going to turn to an attempt to move some puppies. And this will be interesting from both a technical standpoint. So we will do our very best. And again, we're going to hopefully down the road do some movement with adult dogs. But before that, we're going to make sure we have good understanding of how to use the stabilizer.
Okay, so what do we want to do here?
Do you want to grab...
the puppy mover toy?
Do you want to do 2?
I think just one at a time
One
for
at a time?
now.
Okay.
And
We're
we'll
going to
just
try to do one puppy at a time.
and we're going to try to do coming, going, and then looking at it from the side. Think we can do it in the sun?
Just a brief, yeah. Briefly.
Just so there's not as
Yeah. Which do we want? Are we going to start with yellow?
I guess I'll start with
Yeah,
yellow.
let's start with yellow.
Okay. So Dejah, you have to stay here
Yeah,
if you
no,
want to
I'm
be
fine.
talking.
So Yellow, one of the things you can see is that we have a toy attached to a lure line. This is really helpful in getting puppies to move. It's very hard to get the puppy to move at the right pace. Joanne is doing a great job. It's hard to stop either the puppy from galloping or the puppy from grabbing the toy and being drugged. Luckily, Yellow is a little on the tired side, so that's helping us. She's like, can I go back to the shade now? So now we got a little more excitement around the toy. She's like, nope, the shade is better. But there we got a nice shot going away. So this is where we would judge the movement exactly the same as we would in an adult dog. And again, it's not something we've really talked about yet, but we want the puppy to come toward us with legs straight, maybe tending toward single tracking. We want to see the puppy going away with hocks parallel.
Gotta
Again,
pee.
maybe tending toward single tracking. From the side, we would like to see the puppy have nice reach in the front, nice drive in the rear. When we watch the puppy going away from us from the rear, we would like to see the puppy's feet kicking towards us. Yellow wants to continually show us her rear. Her rear looks cute.
Yeah.
Yellow looks happy moving.
Oh, that's good.
There we go, Yellow. That works. Yellow likes her toy. Good girl. And do you think we got a bit of Yellow side gating?
Yeah, we wanted to, because remember we were curious about her top line. If we could try
Yeah.
to just do a little more of her
Yeah,
side
because
gate.
we thought maybe her top line wasn't as strong. It'd be really good to look at how her top line is on the move.
One thing we could try is bang like a bucket. She might think it's her food bowl. Because they're having a delayed lunch today.
I'll try to go.
Yeah.
Yellow's not buying what you're selling.
She's not picking up what you're putting down.
There we go. There we go. It was a nice run back to
Let's
the...
try
You know what?
another.
Let's do that. Yeah, we can try another puppy. Maybe this we should do is put the puppy somewhere else and video it running back to the shade.
There we go.
That's better. I'm not seeing her top line look particularly weak
No.
here, but she does run.
All right.
She
So
moves
can we
very
maybe
nicely.
get the other
She
another
runs-
girl out over
moves
here?
very nicely back to the shade. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to Gold Puppy, and we're gonna see if Gold Puppy's increased rear angulation leads to more drive in her rear. Is her top line look more solid moving than Yellow's? Oh, Gold Puppy wants to gallop. Okay, maybe now we can get her to run away from us. Gold Puppy is attached to her family. That's good. Okay. Pop, 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 pop. Pop, 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 pop.
Good girl.
There's a puppy.
Gold Puppy recognizes her.
Go.
Recognizes her family, unfortunately.
Okay, I lost the puppy.
Yeah, we lost the puppy. The puppy has run to the shade in a different
Puppy's
direction.
peeing again.
Oh, okay.
Everyone has to.
Potty time.
Everyone has to have a small pee break after they get out.
We'll see if you can come around.
She is.
Yay!
Maybe we can side gate towards the shade. That's pretty. There we go. And I want to point out that, again, we're trying to do our best, but we can't zoom in and out in Facebook Live. It's one of those things where occasionally it lets you zoom in and then it won't let you zoom back out. So you're watching the puppy and then suddenly you're zoomed in on a piece of grass. So we're having to do it without the ability to zoom.
That's good. We got a sense.
Yeah. So I thought we got some nice side gating from Gold.
And who do we want to move? Are we moving everybody? Or
Who's this one? This is blue.
Do we want to do blue? We can do blue next.
okay.
Blue's ready.
Blue is just raring to go.
Blue's the volunteer.
He's raring to go.
Blue's the volunteer?
Trying to get out, so.
Yeah. We like to take volunteers if possible.
Puppy! Pup.
Blue quickly ran back to the shade, so we're going to try again. Why don't we come and place them away from the shade and then watch them run back to the shade?
There he is.
We lost him again.
Ah. There we go. Start to my right, your left.
Yeah. So why don't we just carry them and then video them running back to the shade?
Actually, it's just to get a sense. It's probably like 68 degrees and sunny here. It's lovely.
Yeah, Blue just wants to romp.
Hey. Good boy. Come on. Puppy, puppy, puppy.
There's a puppy.
It's always good. This is why it's always good to keep evaluating the puppies over multiple days and more time, because on any given day, puppies are not always as accommodating as we would like.
Who else do we want to try to move?
Red?
Anybody? Or we could just let them all out.
Yeah. Let's do red and then let them all out.
Yeah. Maybe we'll, if we open the gate and then like pull the gate across, so in case somebody makes a run, they don't head that way.
Do you want me to hold it while you do it?
I think Joanne got it.
Yeah, pull up. There you go.
Pups. There they are. I just want to go backwards so we can.
We're a little far away from them. Uh-oh, someone got taken out.
Uh-oh, Margie's watching, Joanne. Don't mess up.
That's good.
Now, I can't at the moment tell who is who, but maybe this is just good to see them. And I don't know, honey, what do you want to do next? Are we...
I think we're pretty much...
I think we might be
wrapping up here, so-
wrapping up. Thank you.
Yeah, so the challenge of moving the puppies is always there when you have to stop and scratch your ear. But definitely this is something that's a little easier to do if you have a nice cool day and the puppies are very fresh. So you can also do something where you evaluate them on the table and then give them an hour of a break and then try to watch them moving. But I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, please don't hesitate to add it as a comment to the post and we'll try to answer, or anyone else can join in and answer if you have thoughts on anyone's questions.
Yeah, we'd love this to be as much of a conversation as
Yeah.
we can make it.
And again, I wanted to thank Joanne, Jojo, Julia, and Zach for helping us out today, and bathing and trimming and fluffing up the puppies. and helping us with the video as well. And so we really appreciate everybody. And again, if you have suggestions for future Newfoundland Conversations videos that you'd like to ask us to look at, we're definitely taking those notes down of what people are suggesting, and we're thinking ahead to what we might do next. So thank you guys so much.
Have a great rest of your day.